Hey everyone, D&D Detective here. So in this video, I want to take the time to do a run-through of a lot of the basic file types in the Infinity engine. I wanted to keep this video relatively short, so this isn't going to cover everything, but it should give you a basic idea of some of the key file types that are used in the engine. First, be sure to get the latest version of Near Infinity. It's been updated since my last video. So starting with 2DA files. These are basically tables the game uses for different things. This covers all sorts of different things in the game. IESDP is a great resource that you can use to see what each of these does. But it can be anything from being used to determine what alignment different classes can be, to determining what creatures are summoned when a specific spell is cast, to determining what the experience bonus you get for unlocking traps, opening locks, and learning spells. All that and much, much more. ARE files or area files. We talked a bit about them before. Area files are exactly what they sound like. They are kind of where everything comes together for a given area. In these files, you've got actors, in other words, creatures, you'll encounter in this area, and you've got containers, so think of barrels and other objects that you can loot. You've also got doors, which can be opened and closed, as well as the travel triggers connected to them. Entrances determine what direction your party faces when you enter an area from somewhere else. They are linked to a travel trigger in that other area. So if you were to enter Candlekeep from the infirmary, you'll end up facing northwest at a specific point on the map, which you can see here. You've also got points of interest. Most of the time, this is going to be travel triggers, like doors, but it can also be info triggers, which are the things you put your cursor over and click on to get a bubble of text to appear. Area files also determine other things, for instance, how likely lightning is to strike in a given area. Then there are proximity triggers. Sometimes these are used for ground traps, and sometimes they are used, in other cases, where you want some script to fire or some other reaction to happen as a result of the party venturing over an area on the ground. Siege of Dragonspear uses this last point fairly frequently.
Not a problem.
You're too late! It's already gone!
Area files also have spawn points, which are locations where certain monsters will spawn. BAM files make up several different things. It's the animation for different creatures and spells, but also they are the item art you see when looking at an item's description, and also spell and item icons. When it comes to creatures and spells, you can click through and check out just how many combinations there are of cycles and frames for a given creature or spell animation. Bear in mind that there are different directions in the game, so sometimes all these frames are showing you how a creature or spell appears in a given direction. BCS files are script files that are compiled. We've used them a few times already. Some notable uses of them include creature AI, area scripts, traps, and cutscenes. BMP files also have several different roles. You've got character portraits in here, but one big thing that uses BMP files is their use for giving details to areas. Let's look at AR0100, Baldur's Gate Northwest. This file that ends in HT is a height map, which details all the altitude across an area. In other words, where things are higher and where things are lower. Then you've got files that end in LM. This is the light map. It's detailing the level and color of illumination in each tile. In its case, it's covering the daytime. Files, on the other hand, that end in LN are covering the nighttime. And finally, you've got SR files. These are search maps. They are used to show where characters cannot walk, and also apparently where footsteps are heard. Next up are CHR files. These are just player character files, and are very similar to CRE files. We covered a lot about CRE files in the third video of this series. They are creature files, so this is where you're going to see the stats for all the summonable creatures in the game, as well as all opponents, NPCs, and your party members. You can also see what scripts they use. Just keep in mind, though, that you can also adjust what scripts an NPC uses, either through scripting or within an area file. So the scripts you see here may not actually end up being used by the NPC in question. A good example of an area file affecting an NPC's scripts is Tethrol in Candlekeep. As you can see, the area file actually changes the script he uses. We talked about DLG files in earlier videos. These are just compiled dialog files. If you're wanting to get an idea of how dialog works in the game, then they are a great resource. You can even uncompile them to get an idea of how they can be used. EFF files are resource files that are most often used by items and spells. One big thing they are used for is when you only want a certain type of creature to be affected by some aspect of a spell. Holy Smite is an example of this, since only evil creatures are affected by it. But items, like the weapons that do extra damage against a specific type of creature, also use these sorts of files. EFF files are also sometimes paired up with a 2DA file as well, especially when it comes to monster summoning spells. There's also IDS files. In practice, these are really important within the engine, but since you're fairly new to modding, you aren't likely to make any major changes to these, with the exception of maybe adding in new spells or new kits. Within them, though, you can see, for instance, all the actions you can use. Not all of these may work, and the best way to learn how they work is by checking out the IESDP page for BGEE actions. There are other IDS files, of course, like names for all the kits and the decimal figure connected to each. My next video will be talking about creating a kit, and one of the things we'll be doing in that video is adding a kit to this file. You're probably familiar with ini files if you've ever had to change around the Baldur.ini file. Ini files were externalized for the enhanced edition of Baldur's Gate. Item files are for items. This covers not only items you pick up in the game, but also items that only creatures can use. Not everything items can do may be immediately obvious though. Sometimes you'll see items that use spell files or EFF files in order to get their desired effect. If you are looking to make an item, my best advice is checking out different items in the game to just get an idea of how they all work. Moss files are used for the map, and different backgrounds for the game's different screens. Profiles are projection files. They are used typically by spells for determining things like their area of effect. Typically, they'll be connected to an animation as well. Keep in mind that some of the values you see in near infinity won't actually be used by the game. If at any point in modding, for instance, you see a fire ring like this, just keep in mind that this is the default setting that near infinity shows on a lot of these sorts of lists when it has no other value to show. So changing this may or may not actually do anything. If we were to look at the profile used by the spell Entangle, you'll see it says fire ring here. Well, clearly, there's no ring of fire that appears when you cast Entangle, so this line probably doesn't actually do anything. As you mod the Infinity Engine more, you'll see that there are some things within the engine that never actually get any use. Ultimately, if you wanted to change up Entangle's animation, you're going to have to look elsewhere for determining where you'd go about changing the animation. This script section just has the scripts used by the player characters. These use the BS file type instead of BCS when compiled. But otherwise, At least in terms of what language they use, I don't think there's any difference between them. The sound section just covers all the player voice sets. For the rest of the sounds in the game, you have to check out the wave files down here. SPL files or spell files. Like with item files, sometimes spell files will use other file types to get their desired effect. So for instance, polymorph spells will use item files to give many of the benefits of the creature you're turning into. And like I said earlier, spells will also use EFF files for specific effects that target specific types of enemies. So for instance, the spell Sunray actually uses multiple EFF files in order to do additional damage to undead specifically. In that case, it does 1000 magic damage as a way to avoid any protection they may have from killing effects, since undead often have a ring or other type of item that prevents killing effects from working on them. Like with items, the best way to learn how to modify spells is really to explore how they work by searching up different spells and abilities. STO files are store files. So in this file, you have the type of store or temple, what kinds of buttons will be available in that store, and all the items and services the store has. Just keep in mind that some of the buttons are hard-coded, so that they can only be used with a certain type of store file. So a tavern is not going to be able to have a screen where you can provide a donation. With that in mind, what options the store has available are also determined by these flags here. Store files are also often connected to a dialog file that is used for determining if you learn a random rumor, say because you donated to a temple or bought alcohol. Also, and I'll admit this isn't very intuitive, but a value of 150 for a sell markup just means it would be sold for 50% higher than its base price, whereas a 50 value for a buy markup means that they only buy it for about half of its base price. A pearl necklace, which has a base price of 1,000 gold, could be bought here for 1,500 gold, but it could only be sold here for 500. Your reputation and charisma, as well as how often you buy and sell the same item here, will also affect these figures as well. Finally, WED files are used by areas and handle implementing the area art and storing the location of that art on the map. Art implementation is definitely not my area of expertise, particularly when it comes to area art, so I can't say much more about it, but I can say they are connected to PVRZ and TIS files, both of which handle the actual background art you'll see in the game. Alright, that's it for the video. I've got a video in the pipeline on how to make custom kits. Obviously, it's taken quite a bit longer than I planned to get it all together, but it and other videos about Infinity Engine modding are still on my radar. If you liked what you saw here, be sure to like and subscribe. This video is really meant to be an overview of some of the more widely used file types in the engine. So if you need help with modding questions, you should get in contact with people in the community through Discord and the G3, SHS, and Beamdog forums. Thanks everyone for watching.